Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Natural Super Kids podcast. Today, we are joined by our NSK team naturopath, Sarah Worboys. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Jess. Nice to be here again.
So nice to be chatting to you, again today. So for anyone who maybe missed previous episodes, Sarah has been on the Natural Super Kids podcast a couple of times before. In episode 33, that was in your very early days of joining the team here. And we just talked about you as a practitioner and you shared some personal insights. And then we also had you a guest on episode 66, where we talked about common poop signs in children and what they can mean.
Yeah.
So for anyone who wants to hear more of Sarah, you can go back to those episodes after you've finished this one. And so today Sarah's going to be sharing a case study of a client she's been working with that had the issue of enlarged tonsils and adenoids. Now, we've talked about this topic a little bit on the podcast before, back on episode 115 and 116, and they were really popular episodes that led to actually quite a few new client bookings, right, for this issue of enlarged tonsils and adenoids.
Yeah, that's right. And that often happens when there's a hot topic that you talk about. People book in because they want to see what they can do for their kids. Yeah,
exactly. So you've been working with an influx of these clients that have this issue, and you've had quite a few cases that you're working with. So we are going to get into the nitty-gritty of this particular case, because I think it's one thing to share the information about something, and we did a Q&A episode on tonsils and adenoids because we had a lot of questions coming in, but I think it's also really helpful to hear like a real story of this in action, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. And because a lot of people come because they've been told that their child needs surgery, they don't often want to go down that path, or they want to pursue other avenues to see if they can avoid surgery. And one of the common questions I get is, how long is this going to take? If it works, what's the time frame I can tell my ENT that I'd like to have before we say yes or no to surgery? So I thought it'd be useful, since I've seen quite a lot recently, giving you an idea of time and what actually the process is.
Yes. I think this is going to be really helpful for a lot of parents that are struggling with this. And we know from sharing this on our Instagram, if you don't follow us over on Instagram, come and check us out. We're always sharing really informative, sometimes funny posts, trying to keep things lighthearted. But there was just so many questions, and we know from the engagement on those posts that so many parents are struggling with this. So we hope that this case study really helps to answer some questions that people might have as well. So for those people who may not have, heard our previous episodes on tonsils and adenoids, we talk about, a lot here at Natural Super Kids, the driving factor under this enlargement of tonsils and adenoids being inflammation. So can you explain a little bit more about like what drives that chronic inflammation for people, Sarah?
Yeah, sure. So inflammation is an immune response, but the acute inflammatory response that we get might be tonsillitis, and they'll get enlarged tonsils with that and have their acute immune response, which will then, after 1 or 2 weeks go away. But what we're talking about with chronic enlarged tonsils and adenoids is chronic inflammation. And this is, a chronic condition, and some of the underlying factors can be, well, common with tonsils and adenoids are allergens. So environmental allergens like dust, animals, pollens. Sometimes kids will have those typical hay fever like symptoms as well with the enlarged adenoids and tonsils. Sometimes they won't. And then other environmental toxins, traffic, household, chemicals, and mold. Other drivers of the inflammation are diet, so food intolerances, overeating particular kinds of food, like, for example, dairy. It's really curious. Sometimes kids who have enlarged tonsils and adenoids love dairy, and that can be a bit of a driver when they're overeating and under eating other kinds of foods like greens and omega-3s. So gut imbalance can also be a driver of inflammation. It can cause like an increased permeability in the gut wall, which then creates a dysregulated immune reaction. And then, imbalance in the gut flora, history of antibiotic use,
Yes, that can be a big one.
constipation. Yeah, yeah. And then, like I just mentioned, with the omega-3s, so the imbalance of the omega oils is a driver of chronic inflammation. And processed foods, having lots of canola, sunflower oil, and then under eating omega-3 oils, so really aiming to switch that balance back to an omega-3 dominance.
Yes, and we see that really commonly in kids, don't we? Like not eating enough of those omega-3 rich foods.
Yeah.
The fish and the seafood and certain seeds and nuts can be quite high in omega-3s as well. And eating too many of the omega-6 sources of
And often they're hidden as well, like in, healthy crackers or corn chips or things that, aiming for gluten-free or whatever, but they're sort of hidden in those. And we just, like, a lot of people consume them every day without really knowing what's in them.
Yeah, and it's actually really tricky to find foods on the supermarket shelves that don't have those omega-6 oils in them, like the canola oil and sunflower oil and corn oil and soy oil and safflower oil. So they are really tricky to avoid completely, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Stress and lack of sleep is another driver of inflammation. And so with the blocked airways from the enlarged tonsils and adenoids, mouth breathing, even sleep apnea can just, lead to stress, but also have a direct impact on the inflammatory response in the body.
Yes. And so, as you can hear, like it is quite complex. And as a parent trying to figure this out on your own, it's really tricky. I mean, it's a giant puzzle for us as practitioners, to figure it out. So for parents to try and figure this out can almost be impossible. Hence the reason, we've had this influx of bookings that are sort of wanting that practitioner support. And this is something we love to do here at Natural Super Kids is, be detectives and figure out, where the key sources of this inflammation are coming from for a particular child.
Yeah, that's right. And I just wanted to mention as well, like on a day-to-day level, often there's congestion too. And so the chronic congestion, like I just mentioned about sleep, that then has a flow-on effect to their energy during the day, their mood, their motivation for getting outside and doing exercise, concentration in school. And then often they just feel irritable, and they can be really difficult to live with. So
yes, that's so good. That's so true. I mean, not so good, so true. That we don't often think of that, the emotional and like mental health impacts that these physical like imbalances can have.
Yeah, that's right. And Another key thing that I see pretty regularly as well with the chronic congestion is that it can affect their taste buds. So often, and in the case study, this was highlighted as well, but I do see it picky eaters. So,
Mm.
and then that, then that has a flow on effect to the gut. So lower diversity in the microbiome can lead to constipation. And then those things affect immune function and absorption, which of nutrients, and then those things drive inflammation as well.
Yeah, such a good point. And as you're talking, I'm just reminded like of just I guess the negative cycle that these kids can get into because, as you said, they start being really picky and fussy with their food, which generally means they lean towards more processed packaged food that's inflammatory. So it just makes the whole thing even worse, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It becomes a bit of a vicious cycle.
Yes, definitely. And that is our kind of job, is to kind of break that negative cycle and start turning that into a more positive health cycle. So let's have a chat now. Like, let's dive into Anna's case. So tell us a little bit about Anna.
Yeah, so she was on a cycle of antihistamines, nasal sprays. She had chronic congestion, and mum really was just wanted to see her daughter be better, but also get off that cycle of antihistamines and nasal sprays. She also lived in Tasmania, and that was a little bit of a red flag for possible vitamin D. It is low vitamin D is really common down there, and the further you are from the equator, it's trickier to get it from being outside and longer winters, and those factors. So vitamin D is, an amazing immune regulator. So that was in the back of my mind with
Yes.
with her
And I was just
picture
going to
as
add,
well.
and a vitamin D also, can reduce inflammation. It's an anti-inflammatory. So, yeah, getting those vitamin D levels up is so important, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. So she was also in a bit of a cycle of recurrent illness, getting sore throats, colds on a monthly cycle. She had a constantly blocked nose. She was getting blood noses, and mouth breathing. Like the blood noses may have come from picking because there was, constantly crusty things up there that are good to pick. Um, she was a picky eater, but she had very particular tastes. Like she had this thing for raw meat.
Oh,
She
interesting.
wanted, yeah, I know, it was curious. She wanted all her foods separated on the plate, and just general picky eating. She had really low energy, and previously, she'd had definitely had periods, like loved dancing, loved being outside. So at this time I saw her, she was quite unmotivated to do any extra activity. Um, she was mouth breathing at night. And some of those signs when kids aren't sleeping well are messy hair in the morning, messy sheets, fatigue during the day, dark circles under their eyes, bedwetting, dry lips. Because some parents aren't sure whether their kids are having a disturbed sleep or their mouth breathing. So they're the things that I look for to see. And then, like at the other end, you can ask, so are their sheets still messy? How do they look when they wake up in the morning? How do they
Yes.
seem? Are they more energized? So they're all clues to know when we're seeing improvement.
Improvements. Yes. And I love that. The messy hair. That's something I'd never really, thought about. I mean, there's those parents that say their kids are always, twisted around, like their head's on the
Yeah,
wrong end of the bed, or they
yeah,
sleep with them still and they're always kicking them in the back. And, but if our kids, just because our kids are not waking up and coming to us at night doesn't necessarily mean they're getting, that good quality restful sleep. So I love those signs that you mentioned to look out for.
yeah. This girl also had low ferritin. So just another sign of that inflammatory process going on in the body, then the inability to absorb those essential nutrients. Because she was eating raw meat. So,
Yeah.
she was obviously, her intake was fine. So then I would think, well, there's inflammation happening.
There's absorption issues. Yeah. And I was just going to say, for anyone who's not sure what ferritin is, that's like stored iron. So low ferritin is a sign that, the child is low in iron or iron deficient. And yes, such a good point. So she was like obviously craving raw meat. So she wanted more iron, and her intake was fine, but it was the absorption because of the inflammation that, was questionable.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we did, so we saw her again, did the treatment plan consult, did some dietary modifications, some herbs, nutrients, and probiotics specifically, all to support immune regulation, reduce inflammation, and build immune tolerance so that reducing inflammation in general.
So all of that was kind of, the goal of a big goal of the treatment plan was to reduce inflammation.
Yeah. She was, I didn't have to say that before, but she was consuming a lot of dairy. It was one of her go-to foods. And I do see this commonly, especially yogurt. I don't know why, but these kids tend to love yogurt, and it's really the opposite food that you want to have with wet mucus congestion, because dairy is just wet and damp. And we want to sort of, limit those foods that cause that in our bodies.
Yes. And then also often it is, that they're having an inflammatory response to dairy. There could be a sensitivity or an intolerance, as well as that kind of, damp kind of action, I guess, that it has.
Yeah. And that gut response that can happen, the overactive response to some foods when the gut's out of balance too.
Yes. So did you eliminate dairy? Like, did you recommend they eliminate dairy completely?
Yeah, we did. And I don't do it lightly, because especially when kids are, really dependent on a food. And in her case, it was just that one thing that we took out. And usually, like in the treatment plan, we'll go through what I recommend, what's ideal, discuss whether this is actually workable for them to take out, and then talk about alternatives and ways to introduce other foods into the diet so that the kids don't feel like they're missing out, and that it's not onerous and stressful on the parent.
Yes, such a good point, because we do get a lot of, comments and questions from our Natural Super Kids Club members. They might have been to see a naturopath. Us naturopaths have this reputation of like, everyone has to cut out gluten and dairy.
Yeah.
But we are especially because we're working with kids, we are, quite cautious, I guess, of that, because especially with fussy kids, dairy can be a good source of minerals and nutrients for kids, but so often it's a problem as well. So we are always, educating parents on what they can replace dairy with. And there are so many great alternatives these days.
Yeah, there are. And often it is for a short period of time. And then there's ways to reintroduce dairy and figure out whether they do have a genuine intolerance and what their tolerance level might be, if they can accept it back into their diet. So,
yes. Okay. And so can you just talk a little bit more about what else, specifically you recommended for this client? And for anyone listening, I do want to say, like, it's really important to get that individualized advice for your particular child. This particular treatment plan is not going to, be correct or most efficient for all children. So I just want to
Mm.
talk to that as well.
Yeah, that's right. For me, it's often a combination of getting a reduction in symptoms as soon as possible, and then also supporting the underlying cause of what's going on. So, I did probiotics with her aimed to regulate her immune response,
Mm-hmm.
and reduce symptoms. And then a combination of some herbs and nutrients. So herbs specifically that reduce that histamine response from the body, supporting immune function, and nutrients. Often, like the nutrients we prescribe, um, help support gut repair as well as help support general cellular function. So things, the common ones, A and D, really good immune modulators, and zinc. So they work in multiple areas in the body, which is great, really.
Yes, you're getting like multiple actions out of,
Yeah.
particular nutrients, which is, and we're all about that. Again, when we're working with kids, we don't want to be prescribing like, 5 or 6 different supplements. Like that's not,
Yeah.
it's not often, possible in terms of compliance with what the child will
Yeah.
take, like
Yeah.
affordability for the family. So we're all about, doing as much as we can with the foundational things, like
That's
the
right.
diet,
Yeah.
and the environment, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then adding in supplements to kind of fill the gaps.
Yeah, yeah, and trying to get some traction early on, because that does seem to get the kids on board. And then, yeah, just getting the best response early on is really important.
Yeah, I really love that you've said that because we are all about addressing the underlying cause. But if people aren't getting improvements in their symptoms, they're not
Mm,
going to be motivated to continue.
yeah.
It's when, yeah, so that's really important, isn't it? And you're so
Mm,
great at that as a practitioner, like addressing those
thanks,
symptoms
Jeff.
quickly as well as addressing the underlying cause.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So, I saw her again 6 weeks after our treatment plan consult. Mum was really seemed confident in being able to introduce the things we talked about at the treatment plan. So 6 weeks was a good amount of time to see what improvement we would get. And yeah, 6 to 8 weeks is generally a really good amount of time to check for changes.
Hmm.
Um, so she had, by that 6 week consult, she'd had a really quite big improvement, almost completely better. Um, the daughter had reported that her taste had improved and she was eating a broader range of food. Mum didn't need to separate food on the plate anymore. Um, and the little girl had said that she'd started eating spices, garlic, and food with taste. And she'd also said, I'm going to stay off this dairy because things taste so much better. So,
Aha.
yeah, so that's a 10-year-old really sort of having a understanding of how a particular food impacts her body.
That's,
Because I
that's
think,
great.
yeah, and I think in that time frame she had had a couple of instances where she'd had dairy and her response was quite immediate. It wasn't delayed. So she really made the connection between congestion and the dairy. Yeah.
Yeah, and that brings up a really important point in terms of like sometimes the parents feel like it's all on them to keep their young children off of certain foods that we might recommend, but sometimes it's actually good for them to experience that themselves. Like, I really want this ice cream, and then they have it, and then they can see the big change. So then they can, they can make that decision for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and so
Um,
what other improvements had mum and her noticed?
yeah. So her energy had really increased and she was back to doing the things she loved. Um, dancing. She also stopped complaining about PE at school because that was always running, and she felt like she could breathe through her nose, so it became a lot easier to do that at school. She stopped mouth breathing. And then, yeah, one of those signs was dry lips, and she was picking them all the time, so that had stopped. Um, she was just overall happier, and her mum said that, yeah, she was a different kid, and it was the best thing we ever did. So
Oh, that's
that was so
amazing.
nice to hear that at that consultation. I mean, it's always great to hear how well the kids are doing. Yeah, so that was really positive.
Yeah, and to
Um,
know that you've kind of, made everyone's life easier in that family. Like, yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
such amazing feedback. And like we were talking about that negative cycle before, like you were really able to turn that around quickly for this this particular 10-year-old girl, Anna, which is so great. And yeah, that, the congestion and the mouth breathing, often lead to that low oxygenation, low energy. So that's so good that then she can, do exercise and actually enjoy life again.
yeah, that's right. And I just wanted to add as well, so we don't always know. I mean, we can look in our child's mouth and see if their tonsils are still enlarged, but we can't often, well, we don't know how big the adenoids are unless a camera goes up there and has
Mm,
a look. So signs around sleep and mouth breathing and mood are all really, valuable to let us assess how well they're breathing and where the inflammation is.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, yeah,
And can we just circle back because I know, like you were talking about the fact that she had that sort of allergy picture, those environmental allergens going on. So how did you like in a practical way reduce exposure to those things?
yeah. So parents can do it. Well, it usually does come up to the parent, but easy things to modify are yeah, reduce to like dust specifically. Soft toys are a big thing. Taking them off the bed, um, or they can have one, or washing them regularly. It's probably easiest on the parent load for cleaning if they just picked one which was washed regularly. Bigger things like carpet and curtains, you know, not so easy to change, but if you can't, vacuuming regularly, washing curtains regularly, wiping down surfaces, using allergenic mattress covers, sunning mattresses. It is a bit of a workload, but I think it can pay off, especially in the initial treatment phase, just really being on top of exposure to dust. And yeah, focusing on one room can really help. And that usually is their bedroom
Yes,
because
and
that's where they sleep and
yes.
spend a
And
lot
a
of
lot of
time.
parents we have a lot of questions like this and help a lot of parents recognize that their kids could potentially have dust sensitivities or allergies because these kids are generally waking up congested and their congestion gets better throughout the day. And that's a real key sign, isn't it? That there could
Yeah.
potentially be some issues with dust. And it's all about minimizing the soft furnishings and the soft toys. And I know that's hard for young kids that love their soft teddies and things, but yeah, minimizing those in the bedroom will help to lighten that cleaning load because the more of those soft furnishings there are in the bedroom, the more vacuuming and cleaning you're going to have to
Yeah,
do.
exactly. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, things like pollen, that's really tricky. But that's where addressing that underlying immune regulation really seems to help. And what I've noticed in clinic is that um, kids don't seem to need their antihistamines as often, their nasal sprays. And that is another key indicator of how well they're improving is their less reliance on those medications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a practitioner, like we're always looking for those signs, aren't we? Because sometimes parents kind of might forget how bad it was, or
They do.
they do,
Yeah.
don't they?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
like patients in general kind of say, oh, I don't know if there's been much improvement, but then we dig into, well, oh, you're not using the antihistamine anymore.
Yeah.
And they're happy to exercise more. They've got energy. Sometimes the progress kind of happens gradually that you forget how bad things were. So that's another benefit of working with a practitioner. So you can kind of get that sense of how much things have improved and whether you're on the right track.
That's right. And that's where also the follow-ups are really important too. And just on that and the size of tonsils, because we haven't really talked about that yet. I had a follow-up this morning with a little boy, and so his allergic symptoms had really reduced. He was on antihistamines and nasals, or not nasal sprays, but antihistamines a few times a week. And mum said she'd only needed to use those 3 times out of the previous 6 weeks since we met for our
Wow.
treatment plan consult. So that was such an indicator. But she'd just been to the immunologist and they'd looked at their tonsils, and the tonsils hadn't decreased in size, but they were not inflamed, and there was still quite a gap in between the tonsils. Um, so, and that means that, they're breathing better. And so mum has decided for the moment not to pursue surgery. So that's another part of the picture to look at, perhaps tonsil size may be slower to decrease.
Mm.
But other symptoms like congestion, itching, runny nose, and sleep all seem to improve. So it's whole picture of progress.
Yeah, such a good point. And like speaking of progress, obviously, this particular case, Anna got quite quick results.
Yeah.
6 weeks, you said she was almost kind of, symptoms were resolved. So, what do you think in terms of setting those realistic expectations for any parents listening?
Yeah, look, that was quite fast, and kids do seem to respond quite quickly, probably faster than adults. Um, I would generally give treatment 8 to 12 weeks minimum before, like probably for tonsils and adenoids, because it is linked with that chronic inflammatory cycle. If you have the time, like a minimum of 3 months, to see what, the diet and the alternative therapies can do to reduce symptoms and also improve other symptoms like sleep, mood, iron absorption, and just general inflammation. So minimum 12 weeks before you make the call if you feel that you've got that time frame.
Mm.
And then possibly even longer depending on what other underlying symptoms there are. Gut issues, constipation is often a big one that goes with this picture as well.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and that's great to sort of share more about what to expect. And I just wanted to also add that if parents do go down the surgery route, like getting tonsils adenoids removed, it's still good to work on this underlying
Yeah,
inflammation, as you're saying. There was lots of positives, positive flow-on effects for Anna's, health and the way that she was feeling day to day. So that complementary approach, sometimes surgery, getting tonsils and adenoids removed is necessary and life-changing for families.
that's right. Yeah.
But yeah, we still can really support addressing some of those underlying factors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing
Thanks,
such an
Jess.
interesting case. And we'll have to do more episodes like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, reach out to us on Instagram if you're listening over at Natural Super Kids and let us know if these, type of case study episodes are something you want to hear more of. And if you've got any particular ailments, symptoms, conditions you want to hear more of, because we really do see a big range of health symptoms and conditions in kids. So thanks for joining me. Is there anything else you want to kind of finish up with, or do you think you kind of addressed everything?
I think we've addressed everything. No, it is nice to share the case studies because sometimes I forget to, the results people have, and we see a lot of people in the clinic. And so, yeah, it's nice to talk about the underlying causes and the results that we're getting in the clinic.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you. And if you would like to book your child in for a consultation with Sarah, you can head on over to our website, and we've got a book a consultation tab at the top. I'll make sure that the link is in the show notes as well, and that's got all the information about our consultation structure, a bit more about Sarah, and you can actually book yourself online. All of our consultations are done online, so you can head on over to that page to check it out. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.